Hello everyone, I'm Niroshan Madampitige. Hope all of you are ready to listen to a wonderful session on agile planning and story point based estimations. Today, it's been my pleasure to talk about this. After working many years in the industry of agile, I thought, why not I discuss this as a webinar? So we have been conducting a lot of training, physical training on various agile topics like planning, retrospection, sprint execution, etc. Today, it's been great pleasure as organizers of Scrum meetups in Colombo to organize this particular webinar. Today, you're going to talk about, or you're going to listen about this particular topic. So, a couple of things that you have to note. In case you have any questions, Q&A is open, so you can drop your questions in Q&A window that will be located at the right side of your window. If you're just watching in YouTube, you may need to open up the group chat through Hangout. In case you don't have any questions, if you just want to listen to the webinar, you just could follow the YouTube link. So in case you are interested in posting any particular note, please do drop them here. So at the end of the session, I'll try to catch up and give elaboration on these topics. If not, what's going to happen is in a later time, I'm going to talk about these things and make that video available for you. So let's start. All right, so why we do need to talk about this? This is crucial for you to understand, because if you don't understand this, you will not be able to understand what you are talking about. So let's look into it. There are two reasons that I primarily believe we should be talking about story point based estimations in agile teams. The number one, a lot of agile teams are struggling to understand story point based estimations. This webinar will help you to understand the concept better. Also, there are misconceptions on this topic. I'll discuss the tricks to get this right. What you're going to talk about here is purely based on extensive research I have done, expert opinions that I have heard. So I invite you to think about these concepts, and then if you have any questions, any clarifications, to get back to me at a later time. All right, so when it comes to agile planning, compared to the traditional planning, there is a pretty much difference. So I have listed down 4 key differences that agile planning would have compared to traditional planning. The number one, agile planning is more focused on planning than a plan. So as you know, traditional project management will insist you that you come up with a detailed plan, top to bottom, telling the customers that this is exactly our plan to implement the product. So we expect the stakeholders, customers to provide detailed explanation about the requirements. So we do a requirement specification at the beginning of the project. The project team will be so busy to look into these details and plan out each and every step. So this has been a problem. This has been a huge issue when it comes to traditional project management. To these changes. That said, not every change that comes our way will be accepted. It's purely based on severity of the problem or the prioritization. Number 3, agile planning results in plans that are easily changed. So it's the same point, it's supporting the same point that we discussed earlier. I beg your pardon, sounds like there's a connection problem, so let me sort that out. So there's a slight delay when it comes to the YouTube streaming. Let me wait for the screen to appear in your screen. As soon as it appears, let me kick off the talk. All right. So there's a slight delay when it comes to the YouTube streaming. The number 4 is spread throughout the levels. This essentially also talks about planning onion. Have you ever heard of planning onion? If not, this is something that you must know as an agilist. So I take your attention onto that quickly. So planning onion is a concept that was introduced by Mike Kahn, very famous agilist who has written multiple books, articles about various subjects in agility. So what he says is, the planning happens at various levels, starting with strategy, then portfolio, product, release, iteration, and daily. Now, if you are a member of a Scrum team, you would have already experienced 3 levels of planning. That is release, iteration, and daily. Release planning focuses on the team. Iteration and daily planning as well as being focused by the team. This essentially means when it comes to the team, these 3 levels of planning will be done. What are those outside the team? That's basically strategy, portfolio, and product. So that talks about the company having a strategy with regard to what the team is supposed to do. For example, let's take a scenario. In case the company has a strategy to implement a shopping cart system in order to enhance the marketing sales of the company, the company might say, look here, we have a strategy to achieve. Based on that strategy, company and the senior leadership might come up and say, we got to do a portfolio for this. So let's design a portfolio. Let's work on a portfolio plan. Portfolio can have multiple products, focusing on each and every business value or stream. So this product can be handed over to the team so that team starts planning at the release level and then iteration level. And within the iteration, daily planning, this is what you see as a daily Scrum. So this is the agile way of planning, and we don't have a very steady plan at the beginning. We'll start with the minimal set of requirements that is sufficient. Hope this is pretty much clear to you. So let's proceed to the next slide. The next slide talks about product backlog estimation. Now, this is the core area that we are going to talk about today. The slide talks about two different ways of doing product backlog estimation. Now, what is a product backlog? Product backlog is a set of user stories arranged or prepared in order to capture the requirements of a given product. So if you go back here, by the time you start doing the product backlog, you probably have thought of a release in terms of a product. One product can have multiple releases. That essentially means you don't need to release everything at once. So you start with the requirement set that is crucial, that is value adding to the business. This can be the topmost priority for the team. When this is the top priority for the customers, stakeholders, the team talks to the stakeholders, the client. In this case, we have a role called product owner. Product owner is primarily the delegate for the customers, because we cannot expect the customer to be fully aware of the agile practices as well as available as the team needs. Therefore, we have a product owner who will represent the business, who will capture the requirements and then communicate that to the team so that team can start working on the development. So at the release level, we start creating or preparing a product backlog. Product backlog is a simply set of requirements that are arranged in a form of user stories. User story is the minimal feasible feature or the requirement that can be implemented as a functionality. So we're gonna look at that in detail. So for the moment, let's proceed. So agile teams use two different ways in order to estimate product backlog. The number one, story points. Number two, ideal days. Hopefully, you all are familiar with these two concepts. Let's take a look at each concept. Let's have a look at these two examples and see how we are going to do this estimation. Let me ask two questions. First, what is your estimation in order to fly from Sri Lanka to Singapore, or to prepare for a 7-minute speech on human values? Based on how familiar you are with the task, the complexity of it, how uncertain the task is, your estimation can vary. Now, in typical project management world, all what we do is, in order to estimate something like this, we may use a definite figure, something like days, hours, months, years, etc. In Agile world, we try to do it in a relative manner. We don't try to bind particular measure with that. So what we do is we say, okay, let me do it relatively. For example, I would say, for the first task, to fly from Sri Lanka to Singapore, since I know the process, since I know the people who have visited or gone there, even though I haven't gone, I could simply say 8. 8 is just a figure that indicates some sort of measure. When I do that, let me look at the second one. To prepare for a 7-minute speech on human values. As I do speeches quite oftenly, this is something familiar to me, and I can now compare the estimate for this with the previous estimates that I have done. So when I estimate that, I look at 3 figures. One is size, second is the complexity, third is uncertainty. So considering all of this, all what I do is I give a figure. I'll say 1. Compared to the previous one, my estimates implies that the time it would take for me to prepare for a 7-minute speech on human values is 8 times lesser than the previous estimate. So that's all we need to figure in relative estimations. Hope this is clear. If you have any questions, please do post it in the chat window. So towards the end, I'll pick up them and try to answer most of it. Let's have a look at this. Now, usually estimate size is derived from duration. Let's take an example. I want to carry 300 kilograms of sand using a wheelbarrow. So what do? I know the size. What is the size? 300 kilograms. I do a simple calculation. In one go, how much of weight can I carry? By estimates, I could carry 20 kilos very easily, comfortably. I don't want to stretch myself because I have never done it. Now what I do is, so I know for one round, I can carry 20 kilos. If I want to carry the entire weight, that is 300 kilograms, I simply do calculate how many turns, how many rounds I have to go. 300 divided by 20 comes to 50. So 20 is my capacity for one round. When I divide the total weight that I have to carry by the capacity for one round, it gives me 50. Now in agile terms, 20 is the velocity, that is the team's capacity. 15 is number of sprints in order to carry the entire weight. Simple as that. The next, let's have a look at measures of size. There are two measures of sizes, sequential and agile way. In a sequential way, all what we do in order to measure the size is lines of code. One example is that. And then we may say there are this many number of function points. But in agile way, how do I do that? I could say, I am going to use story points. What are story points? It's a relative way of telling the team and everyone else, this is what it needs for me to do whatever the job. Then ideal days. As the name suggests, ideal days is simply a set of days or a day, assuming you're not interrupted, your 100% attention on a given job, as well as all what you need in order to get to the job is provided to you. So these are the two ways of measuring the size in sequential way and an agile way. So let's dig deeper into ideal days. It's how long something would take, assuming your 100% attention on this, as we discussed. You had no interruptions. We assume you're not going to be interrupted by anyone, by anything, and everything you need is available. The ideal time of a football game is 60 minutes, for an example. For 10 minutes quarters, but elapsed time is much longer than 2 hours maybe. Now, let's have a look at story points. The bigness of a task, which is influenced by how hard or complex the task is. Size of the task. Relative values are what is important. Example, login screen is 2. A search feature is an 8. Usually the points are useless. Unitless. This essentially means we don't put a particular unit into these points. It's just a relative way of measuring the size. Let's take a few examples. I have taken most of these concepts from one of my favorite CSTs and trainers, agile trainers, Mike Kahn. Mike Kahn uses the zoo points to elaborate what exactly means. So I'm not being able to be in a room that's soundproof. If you to apologize me. All right, so let's get. If you want to estimate what value in the start with client. So let me ask you. You may just go through thinking process on a webinar. What is for a line? Just pick any number. It can be anything. Let me say 10. Now, let me ask your estimation for sizing, measuring the size for the dog. Now, what is your estimate? I would say probably 6. In this case, I'm not considering any particular index, standard index. In Agile terms, when we do relative estimations, there are quite a few standards indexes that we can use. One team could use something called t-shirt time size. Something like, you just need to figure, in terms of a size of a story, you just need to figure extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, etc. So now let's go for the third example as well. Now, if I want you to estimate the size of a bear, what would you do now? Now you have 2 estimations. When I ask you to estimate the size of the bear, you simply relate that with the previous estimations and then give a relative figure. So the idea is not to be specific, get accurate, but to measure the size of these animals in kind of a meaningful way, so that it gives a picture for the team and the stakeholders. This is what the size looks like. I think it's pretty clear to you. In case you have questions, please do log your questions to the chat window. Let's proceed. Now, if you try to compare these 2 approaches, story points help drive cross-functional behavior. Story points estimates do not decay. That means whatever the estimations you are giving will not be decayed. It's gonna be valid forever. Story points are a pure measure of size. Estimating in story points is typically faster. These are some of the reasons why you could use story points in an Agile environment. My ideal days cannot be added to your ideal days. So this is very crucial. Even when it comes to story point based estimations, sometimes I hear some of the Agile teams try to compare their estimations with other teams' estimations using story points. That's not possible, because these 2 teams will be in totally 2 different contexts. So in scenarios like that, it's not possible for anyone to measure that. Ideal days are easy to explain outside the team. Now, for example, if you want to tell your clients how many days will it take for you to complete a task, that's not going to be easy. Ideal days are easier to estimate at first, because you are simply assuming no interruptions, there'll be total allocation, and everything will be there. So based on that, you are going to give a set of estimations. It can be in days, it can be hours, it can be in minutes. So it's very easy to figure these. Ideal days can force companies to confront time wasting activities. Now, for example, if a team has a capacity of 100 hours, this basically helps the teams to count all these hours available and then estimate. We have been talking about different units. Now let's go into the next topic. There are different techniques that we can use in estimating. There's one technique called estimate by analogy. Comparing a user story to others, the story is like other stories, so its estimate is what that story's estimate was. General advice given by the experts in the agile industry is that never use a single gold standard. That essentially means you can't simply say this is it. This is the only way of estimating. So there is another technique called triangulate. Compares the stories being estimated to multiple other stories. So this is called triangulating. So this allows you to validate your estimations for a given story. If you don't do that, what happens is you may estimate with multiple contexts. That's not going to be right. And then agile teams also must ensure they use the right units. If you don't use the right units, what could happen is your estimations can go wrong. So generally, you need to pick the right units. What does this mean? Now, if you think numbers from 1 to 100, experts don't suggest that you use that range. Why? Simply because when you use that range, you will try to differentiate with very minimal gaps. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, all these can be possible estimations for you. Now, when you do that, what happens is you try to be more specific and your estimations can go hugely variated. So to avoid that, what we generally use is we use some of the standard indexes like Fibonacci metrics or t-shirt sizes, etc. Also use a set of numbers that make sense. I like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. So this is coming from Fibonacci index. And also, you probably have to stay mostly in a range of 1 to 10. Why? Because that could give you a baseline to operate within. If you row and half, if you like, there's a reason for this. Now let's take a scenario. Let's assume you're going to do a login page. In that, there's a story called create the HTML layout. Let's assume this takes an estimate of story points, one story points. Now, if there's a story, again a story, to correct a minor typo, just one letter typo, what is your estimate? Now, you face a problem. Why? You estimated something bigger and now you don't have a measure to size the typo related user story. Now that's why experts suggest if you want to customize your Fibonacci index, go ahead. That will, if that helps. For example, you could use half in between 0 and 1. That allows you to measure stories in between 0 and 1. If it's 1, give 1. Otherwise, say half, smaller than. Using Fibonacci indexing or t-shirt sizing would allow you to agree to the nature, and we believe everything else operate in a similar manner. Most of the agile teams use planning poker for estimating. What is planning poker is simply a way of allowing the team to be non-biased in estimating. What does that mean? So this is an iterative approach which allows all the members of the team to come up with their estimations at the same time. So these are the steps. Each estimator is given a deck of cards. Each card has a valid estimate written on it. Customer product owner reads a story and it's discussed briefly. Each estimator selects a card that is his or her estimate. Cards are so all can see them. Discuss differences, especially outliers. For example, if someone says 3 for a given task, someone says 20 for another task, we invite these two outliers to justify their estimations. Everyone listen to these estimations and then go for another round. Same way. And the next round of estimations probably will be adjusted based on the justifications that everyone heard. So even if it doesn't give you a common ground where most of the guys are agreed on a relative figure, common figure, then you go for another round. There's no harm. So you could do this until you get the right numbers, the agreed numbers. Generally, with maximum of 3 attempts, the teams are being able to get to an agreed figure. That's a maximum that I would say you should do. That's that, and then next move on to the next one. Planning POC example. Now, if you don't have deck of cards, there are multiple sites that you can use. There's planningpoc.com, that's done by Mike Kahn. There is this site that I mostly use because this is so user-friendly, it's easy. You don't need to log in. One has to just start a session and then share the session ID with everyone else in the team. So particularly if you have a virtual team, this kind of approach is great because even the product owner will be amazed with how it's done. So you follow the same steps that we discussed earlier. In order to understand these concepts, I request you to have a look at these stories. Assume that this is your product backlog item. Let me go through them. Read a high-level 5-page overview of Scrum in Scrum Alliance. So if you have not seen Scrum Alliance, if you haven't gone through any particular Scrum articles, this may sound strange for you, but if you're somewhat familiar with it, you may be confident to estimate this. Whatever it is, you all are requested to estimate. Let me give an estimate. So let me read the story again. Read a high-level 5-page overview of Scrum in Scrum Alliance. I have done this. Therefore, I would say this just talks about writing it. Now, what if I'm not very clear about the scope of it? Now, writing would essentially mean just drafting. It doesn't say draft, but it says, sorry, read. So of course, it's specific, right? You would come to certain assumptions in estimating that. You would say this is pretty much standard text with less pictures. That will increase the text number of words in that article. So I would say average 5 diagrams in these pages, which will come to about 3.5 or 3 full pages. So I would say 30 minutes. How you do this is using the planning book. So we all can go here. So let me do that so that you get a good sense of it. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, log into this. So that's no login required. So all what you do is you start the session. So if you have a multiple team, or sorry, multiple members in your team, you join the session first. So it requests you to donate it, but since we are on a webinar, let me do that later. So the product owner may write the story description. You know, that's what I do. I ask product owner to, or in case product owner will not be ready for that, I will write the story here. So in case you use Jira or RTZ or something, it's just a matter of copying that and pasting here. In fact, you can go to Jira and then read the story and come here to estimate it. So whatever the way works for you, there's no hard and fast rule for that. So this shows the customized Fibonacci index. As we discussed, half is there, half point. So I'll say, instead of estimating in it in minutes or hours, I would say half. Right? So when I do that, even though it shows me, because it's just me, in case there are multiple people, if you are there, all what you can do is, can you log into this and enter this session ID by the time you join the session? So I should be able to see whether some of you are trying this out. So I'll give just 30 seconds. Please do enter the URL if you would like to try this out. All right, so sounds like no one is willing to do that, or no one is there. But let me just proceed. The session will be recorded, and at least any of you who is interested to watch this or listen to this can follow my YouTube channel. All right, so thanks for that. Right, so yeah, so it shows for some reason, but what happens is, I'll let me clear that. So if you can just do that estimation again. Do that. Let me go for it. I estimate. Ras, if you can estimate it, that will be great. Okay, assuming you have done it, let me show the words. There's a big delay. And probably by the time you see this, I'm pretty much done with that. Yeah, so that's how it works. So if there are multiple members, actually you all can do that. Yeah, so unless everyone has done it, it will indicate that everyone has done with this check mark. You don't need to show that. So as soon as everyone is ready, you simply show that. So this will give every estimate. So look at these figures and then see whether everyone is within a agreed range. If not, ask outliers to justify their case. Listen to them and then go for another round. You may do that until you get to a point where everyone agrees. So that's how you could do that. So let me go back to the slide deck. And then again, if you want to estimate any other story, you do the same thing. Study and prepare for a 20 minutes presentation on Scrum framework. So again, you could estimate the same way using a tool like that, or using a slide deck. So, sorry, poker planning card deck. Write the product backlog for a simple e-commerce site that sells only clocks. Now, look at this. Now, compared to the first one, how could you estimate this? All what you need to do is look at the size, see how big this task compared to the previous one. Look at the complexity, how complex it is compared to the previous one. How uncertain this is compared to the previous one. So considering all these three parameters, you could come up with a figure. Now, this involves a lot of prerequisites, like having a proper vision, proper milestone, roadmap, etc. Therefore, I would simply say this is pretty much. So let's have a look at this index, right? So in estimating, you need to ensure that you stay within the sequence. So it's basically 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40. Now I would say 40 or 20 for that. But in my teams, what I would do is I would agree on a range from 1 to 10. So anything becomes more than that probably needs to broken down into sub stories. This is called disaggregation. You disaggregate to smaller tasks until you get to the range that you want your team to be. So I would rewrite saying, write the product backlog that is sufficient for 2 sprints. So that's how I scale it down. And then also I may clarify certain assumptions that the team would have at this point. For example, I would say, assuming you have understood the product milestone, roadmap, vision, and high level business objectives. So that clarifies that you really don't have to spend any extra time in order to do that. So similarly, I won't go through everything else, but let me just go through one more thing. So I have written some generic examples so that you could relate it with. So if you want to talk about more specific requirements, you probably can do that. So again, if you look at the numbers 5, write a recommendation in LinkedIn for one of your teammates. So I often do that. You probably do that. So what's your estimation? So now you don't have to just limit your comparison to one single story. Compare that with multiple stories. That will give you a figure. So I'll simply say 1. It's almost same as reading a 5-page article on Scrum Alliance. But I need to be very careful about the spelling mistakes and the way I write. So I may do a bit of research if I haven't done it, etc. So assuming that, considering all these assumptions, I would say 1. Now, if I'm not clear on anything, I have to clarify it until I'm pretty clear to estimate. Go ahead with the estimate. So there is one last thing that we need to discuss. That's simply estimating stories with mixing units. What does that mean? Now, in most of my teams, the stories that we get are mixed. Essentially, there are engineering tasks, there are QA tasks, there are BA tasks, there are various design tasks, etc. Now, if you have a requirement that has a mixed set of functionality, tasks, that multiple streams and multiple caliber of skills that have to be involved, that's called a story with a mixing set of mixing units. So how do you do that? The recommended way is this. For example, as a user, I want to log into the system. Now, this is so generic. It's fine as long as it's within the reachable approach given a sprint. So you may decide you may have sprints that last for 2 weeks. That essentially means 10 working days. Assuming the entire team works on it, based on the number of people involved, the size could be a bit bigger. But one thing you need to ensure is that you really don't have to or shouldn't have included a story that goes beyond one particular sprint. For example, if you have 4-member team, the total velocity, say 35, 40. So you need to ensure that your story points estimations total don't exceed the total velocity of your team for a given sprint. So we simply don't encourage the stories which are bigger than the velocity of the team. And also, I personally don't recommend having a huge story. I would say break it down to a level where you can track every day or at least one time a few days. That allows the team and everyone else who is interested to see the progress to see the progress. So I think this is pretty much it. So let me have a quick look at the chat window. In case if you have any, hopefully chat works fine, but at this point I haven't heard any questions. I'm just typing it. So if you have any questions, I would allocate the next 13 minutes for questions. Let me stop the screen share. That's it. That's pretty much it. So I don't need to utilize the entire time, because the last 15 minutes I wanted to allocate for questions. Since we don't have any questions or concerns, clarifications are to be done, we shall close the session. Thanks for joining the call, and looking forward to see you again.